Welcome to the Unlist. Today we're talking about mall scents. And when I say mall scents, I don't mean fragrances sold in a mall. I mean fragrances designed to be sold in a mall. So we're talking about mall boutiques that sell fragrance like Bath & Body Works or a Body Shop, Lush, L'Occitane, but also like mall chains of clothing, clothing brands that have locations in malls. So Lucky You, The Gap, Express, Victoria's Secret, that all have lines of fragrances of their own, of course. Zara's another big one. Those are mall scents. Let's talk about them. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they worth looking into or not? Now, the thing is, in my opinion, mall brands represent like the last bastion of accessible fragrance because everyone has a mall somewhere nearby, right? And these mall stores are chained, so they have locations in a lot of places. So it's a wider scale than your exclusive designer brands, right? So they're a little more available, a little more accessible. And their price points tend to float. A lot of them are lower than designers, 40, 50, 60 bucks a bottle. Some of them can be around designer price points, like the Abercrombie & Fitch stuff is basically at designer levels. And then some of them can actually be more close to niche territory. Things like Lush, for instance. Those fragrances tout to be made primarily of naturals. And just like a lot of niche brands have higher concentrations, cost a lot more, 150, 170 bucks for some of these for 100 mil. But they're all parfums and they're all more artistic in design, right? So they fit the theme of Lush. So there's a bit of a diaspora, if you will, in the mall population of fragrance brands. But by and large, they are more accessible than designers, sometimes cheaper than designers. They're kind of like the last line of defense for value brands because drugstore brands are gone. When's the last time Coty released a Coty branded fragrance and sold it in a drugstore? When's the last time you saw Elizabeth Arden make a new fragrance put in a drugstore? Brands like Dana only do pour reformulations of old fragrances, right? When's the last time you saw a brand new fragrance from Dana? That was 2024. That wasn't some reissued old fragrance that they got their hands on, right? And then poorly reformulated. You don't. Eden Classics is called Eden Classics, not just Eden. They don't make new fragrances. So by and large, drugstore brands are dead. And pretty soon, the mid-tier designer brands are going to also be dead. Because a lot of them, even Calvin Klein, pulling themselves up. Perry Ellis, pulling themselves up market. They're following all the other ones, Tom Ford, Moncler, all the really high-end designer brands that are like $200, $300 a bottle, Louis Vuitton. All of the ones beneath them are also joining them. They're all just migrating up market. So you're not going to be able to get any fragrance for like under 150 bucks before long. So there'll be this gigantic vacuum in the middle because there are no entry-level brands. They're gone, like I said. And pretty soon there won't be any middle-tier brands either. They'll be gone too. There'll be nothing below 150 bucks. That's worthwhile anyway. You'll have cans of Axe and roll-on deodorant at the supermarket. So like you'll have your Shore and your Dove and your Axe and stuff. But then you'll have nothing between that $10 price point all the way up to $150. Nothing in between. Except for the mall brands. They are it. The mall brands are the Alamo. They are holding it down. The mall brands are the Battle of the Bulge. Another military reference. The mall brands are the blue whales. They are the California condors. Okay, they are near extinction. So, should we let them go the way of the dodo? Should we stop trying to preserve them and keep them in zoos like Siberian tigers and pandas? Should we just let them die out? Or should we support them? Are they worth it? Is there anything left in this value segment? And before you say, what about Avon and what about Oriflame and what about those particular brands are very pinpoint focused on certain markets. I mean, Avon no longer really sells hardly in the U.S. anymore. They focus on the poorer GDP countries. If you want to call them third world, you can. I don't want to use that term and get someone's political feathers in a tussle and then them try to cancel me for saying it, but, you know, third world or low GDP, whatever your chosen vernacular here is, Avon tends to focus on countries where people can't afford even the mall fragrances, where adjusted for exchange rate, something like $15, $20 is just about luxury, where a person can barely afford that. That's where the money is for those brands, and that's where they go. So you see a lot of Avon in South America. They're owned by a Brazilian conglomerate, actually. You see it in Eastern Europe. You see it in Africa. That's where the Avon's being sold, people. It's not being sold in Connecticut. It's not being sold in Germany, all right? It's being sold in those places. So that's why I leave them out of the question. I mean, I still love my Avon, all my vintage ones and everything, and all the Americana and the history, but the reality is they're not really being sold here. Not really. It's a tiny little market. It's very niche now. Ironically, Avon is more niche than some niche brands are. So, the mall brands, they're not all created equal, as I said, price point wise, quality wise, but they do represent the last in line, to use a Ronnie James Dio reference, okay? Or I can use a movie reference and say Last of the Mohicans. They are it. They are the final, they are the rear guard, okay? So shall we let them go silently into the night, or shall we support them? And of course, I can't give you a total yes or no answer. It's a gray area question, so I can only give you a gray area answer. In my opinion, I think it really depends on what you're looking for. So a lot of the mall brands that focus on just fragrance, like your L'Occitane, like your Lush, like your Bath & Body Works, they kind of exist in one category. The mall brands that sell clothing, sell accessories, lingerie, like Victoria's Secret, like Express, like Abercrombie & Fitch, they exist in another category. Okay? So we got to kind of separate those two. The brands like Lush and L'Occitane and Bath & Body Works, there's good, better, best. So obviously, brands like Bath & Body Works represent good. Bath & Body Works is probably the closest direct comparable to an Avon, to a Mary Kay, to an Oriflame, Armand Dupree, one of those. But actually, I think pound for pound, the mail order brands are still better. Because I've discussed many times in the past, Avon will use higher R&D budgets, higher material budgets. They will get good perfumers. Alberto Morillas has made fragrances for Avon, for example. So has Harry Fremont. Frank Vocal, Cecile Zarcone. I think even Olivier Polge made an Avon fragrance here or there. So they get some good stuff. Bath & Body Works, though, not so much. Their fragrances are 30, 40 bucks, and they smell like they're 30, 40 bucks. They're not going to be like Avon, where it's 30, 40 bucks and it's comparable to a designer, right? They're not going to be like that. They're simple and effective. A lot of times they're very low performance, admittedly, not very good. If you're a guy that cares about performance, if you care about projection and all that, Bath & Body Works is probably going to let you down. And a lot of their fragrances also seem to have a very sort of, I don't know, I want to say they have a very sort of lazy way about them. You know, they'll have Canyon, Classic, Oak, Citron, Noir, these one-word names. You get lucky with Glacier Bay or Mahogany Woods where it's two names, compound word. But a lot of them just seem kind of lazy. And they smell it too. You know, Ocean is just like, it was just the most generic aquatic. Didn't last long at all. Glacier Bay was the same way. Nothing to really stand out. Noir could have been any number of Armani Code copycats. Mahogany Woods could have been any number of The One for Men by Dolce & Gabbana copycats. Okay. Oak was kind of interesting. Oak was kind of like probably among the better ones they had. Classic wasn't bad either. But the problem is they all get discontinued really quickly. They come out and they're gone. Like Avon, you know, again, like Avon, they come out and they're gone. And for some reason, people always go nuts about them. People like to hype the Bath and Body Works. I have seen several times people will hype certain ones. They hyped the bourbon, they hyped the Formula number 21 or whatever it was called. They hyped the Mahogany Woods one, and then they get hyped, and then they end up like $300 on eBay. And I just laugh because I'm like, these were a poor value at $30. These weren't a great value at $30. So you put an extra zero on that, and it doesn't make it a better proposition, does it? No, not really. I will say, though, that Bath & Body Works does what they say they're going to do in their name. Bath and Body Works, not Cologne Works and Perfume Works. So that means their shower gels are solid, their soaps are solid, their lotions, their candles. The Bath & Body Works stuff, that the name is on the sign, that's where they make their money. They're not really making their money with the fragrances so much. But that's what they do. They make fragrances, they just put them in cosmetics usually. And the standalone fragrances, the standalone stuff is just kind of there as an impulse. If you already have the body wash, the oak body wash or whatever, you might want the oak cologne to go with it. That's what that does. That's what it's there for. Now, L'Occitane is a bit of a different animal. I like L'Occitane. Their stuff is pricier per mil. You won't get a 100 ml bottle, you'll get a 75 ml bottle. They used to do 100 mils, but then they decided to do shrinkflation. They did what many brands do, and they just made the bottle smaller for the same price. But they have some good stuff. I mean, they have some really nice lavender fragrances. They have some really nice green, dewy, grassy, floral stuff. Okay. One of the big favorites from them is the Eau de Bas for the guys. The guys like Eau de Bas, and that kind of smells like a peppery Tom Ford Tobacco Vanille, but it came out a year before Tobacco Vanille, so it's probably more than likely that it was the same assignment, the same brief, and the Tobacco Vanille was a alternate mod. I mean, I can't say for sure. Or Tom Ford just liked the Eau de Bas so much that he decided to do a spin on it. Who knows? He's been guilty of plagiarism a number of times. So, wouldn't put it past him. Anyhow, L'Occitane is really good, but they also are very limited. They don't make a lot of fragrances, and they also discontinue a lot of fragrances. They come out with something, and sometimes it'll come out, and it'll only come out in one market. So it might only come out on the East Coast of the U.S. or the West Coast of the U.S., or it may only come out in Europe. So they have a lot of things that you never get to see, or you see very briefly and then they're gone. So it's one of those things with L'Occitane where you get anxiety, you buy it, and you're afraid you're not going to be able to rebuy it. So what do? Hoard and buy 15 backups of it and then decide you hate it in a year and have to sell all those backups? It becomes madness. But yeah, they rotate stuff in and out so often that it can become a bit of a boondoggle. Certain ones never go away. The original L'Occitane fragrance is safely going to stay. The Vervienne scent, which is their lemon verbena scent, the Vervienne's not going away. That's another big seller. That one's going to always be around. But certain other ones, like the Cade fragrance, Eau de Cade, come and go. The vetiver came and went. So it's like, don't get attached to them, right? It's a bad idea. Now, Lush is kind of the top end of that little thing there. And Lush is a unique creature. Lush is basically, in my mind, a niche brand. And you could even go a step further and call them an artisanal brand or an indie brand, because the perfumes are created by someone who is an autodidact, okay? So we're talking about a self-trained perfumer who started off in the cosmetics world. He actually worked for the Body Shop, who also has fragrances, but the Body Shop fragrances are just about garbage, so we're not even talking about them. We're leaving them out. Sorry for those of you people who like the Body Shop stuff, but it's trash in my opinion. I'm not wasting my video on it. So, Mark Constantine left the Body Shop and formed Lush, and he was like a self-trained perfumer, uses a lot of naturals, and his stuff has a very bohemian, hippie feel to it because he's autodidactic. He has not gone to school. He has not taken chemistry on this stuff. He's just kind of figured it out on the way. So his fragrances do smell a bit rough around the edges. They do smell a bit unpolished. But they're quirky, they're fun, and most of them are very, very strong. So You could spend the $175 that they ask for some of those 100 ml bottles, but chances are a single 1 ounce will be just fine because you're never going to go through a whole ounce of Lust, let me tell you. I still have an ounce bottle of Karma I bought like 10 years ago, and I've put maybe that much of it in. So it's about 1/5 of the way gone after 10 years. Stuff is just potent, man. It's one spray. I've got a 100 ml bottle of Dirty that I'm probably going to get buried with because it's just so strong. So you don't really need those big bottles unless you just are a glutton for punishment. But this stuff is quality, not the most sophisticated blends, not the most complicated fragrances, heavy-handed on the materials, you know, the frangipani notes, the lavender notes, when he uses sandalwood, when he uses patchouli, you know it. You feel the materials in the fragrance. Lust is a 1-2 punch of rose and jasmine. Just rose and jasmine, just like that in the face. Okay, 1-2 punch. Nothing doing, that's what it is. Either you love it or you shove it. So for that reason, you might want to smell before you buy. I mean, you typically would go into a boutique anyway. I wouldn't suggest mail ordering Lush, but just worth mentioning. Now we go on to the other stuff. The ones that sit on the like boutique clothing designer side of the mall spectrum. So we're talking the Abercrombie & Fitches, the Victoria's Secret, the Gap, the Express, all those guys, right? Zara, right? Those guys. What's the deal with them? Well, certain ones have gotten really huge, right? I don't gotta tell you, you already know that there was a point in time where you couldn't avoid smelling Fierce cologne. If you weren't smelling it on a person riding the bus with you, you were smelling it pumped through the air ducts of the store, which would then escape the front door of the store. And you would smell the Fierce cologne before you saw the Abercrombie & Fitch store. So you would go, okay, Abercrombie & Fitch is nearby, I can smell it. Lush to a lesser extent. Lush is also pretty potent. You can smell Lush before you see it. But definitely with the Abercrombie & Fitch, you could smell that Fierce from like 100 yards away before you saw the storefront. That's how bad it was at one point. So Fierce was definitely a cultural phenomenon, and a lot of fragrances were kind of inspired by it. Some say that Mont Blanc Legend is kind of inspired by it a little bit. I can see it. To me, it's more like Fierce and maybe Curve mixed together. It's not strictly Fierce. It's not a clone, but I can see the DNA there. And then you got Lucky You. When I talked about Liz Claiborne, I discussed Lucky You in that video, so I don't want to go over Lucky You again here, but it was a very popular boutique mall fragrance. Lucky You, men and women both, were very successful. You can still buy them, still made, still sold. Still quite popular, although it's not maybe as popular as it was 20 years ago, but it's definitely still up there. Then you've got some lesser known ones. Victoria's Secret has had some fragrances for both men and women, but they've discontinued a lot of their stuff because it doesn't sell, right? So they had a line called Very Sexy that was pretty good. It's kind of an eternity-ish kind of vibe to it, but it was pretty good. Express had a couple that were really good. Express had a fragrance called Honor, a really heavy bottle, but unfortunately that also got discontinued, and it's too much money now, so don't bother looking for it. But it was good when it existed. It had like a nice juniper feel to it, like a juniper and woods kind of combination. The Gap has had some pretty weird stuff. The Gap had a whole series of fragrances, and the one that people talk about today is the one called Visionary. Very heavily geranium focused fragrance, very sharp fragrance. I've smelled the Visionary, I've had samples of it, and I didn't really find it all that great, so I didn't really get into it. But yeah, by and large, all of these boutiques have fragrances. Ted Baker is kind of on the higher end. Ted Baker has fragrances too. They were sold in department stores for a little while, but they're mainly only sold in the Ted Baker boutiques. But you find them. Vera Wang was the same way, you know, had their fragrances in their boutiques. And then, of course, well, I can't go without mentioning Zara. Zara is where we're going to cap this video off. Zara has a very prolific output for a mall clothing store. It's almost ridiculous how prolific their fragrance output is. And I'm trying to figure out why they pump out so many fragrances. they're getting to the point where it's like you get intimidated because there are so many. And it's not like they discontinue them. It's not like with, I mentioned like with Victoria's Secret or Bath and Body Works where they get rotated in and out. They just clutter up the store. You go to the checkout counter where you go to ring up your items and all of them are just kind of sitting there all piled in boxes. And there's just so many of them. And you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Right? And then a lot of them also get taken to discounters so you can buy them on Fragrance X and stuff and Fragrance Net or whatever. But there's just so many and they just keep making more. So it's like I can't hold all these Zara bottles. There's just so many. And it's a bit intimidating, but they're probably best known. They're probably best known for their Aventus clones, which is a sad thing to be known for, honestly. If you are a clothing chain that makes a bunch of fragrances, to be known for your clone fragrances, the ones that are copying another fragrance, that's a bit sad. But the Zara Vibrant Leather line, which was their Aventus line, that's what all the guys online go nuts for. That's the one they always talk about. And they've had a ton of flankers for that too. So it's weird. You've got an Aventus clone with flankers. Here's the lemony one. Here's the extra woody one. Here's the more leathery one. But they also have that Aventus DNA. They just have Aventus DNA plus strawberry, or Aventus DNA plus chocolate, or whatever. It's bizarre. But they have a cult following, and there are people out there who will have every single version of the Vibrant Leather. They will have every single Zara Vibrant Leather that's been made. Recently, though, they did an oud line. And the oud line was a bit more expensive. So we're talking like $70, $80 a bottle, which is a lot for Zara's float around $50 usually. So $50, $60 is the average Zara price. These are like $80, so they're a little more expensive. But they came out with an oud line, and while they're not really oudy, in my opinion, they're just woody ambers, but they're cleverly done, and Alberto Morillas has done them all. And they are exceptionally high quality. So the one thing about Zara that I can say is that Zara fragrances don't smell cheap, okay? Unlike Bath and Body Works, they don't smell like they cost what they cost. And this new oud range they put out like last year is very much of that caliber. They smell really good. The one I have is called Elevated Oud. And Elevated Oud kind of smells similar to like a Gucci Guilty Absolute. So if you like that, a really heavy patchouli, leather, sort of petrol kind of vibe a little bit. People call it the Band-Aid vibe. If you like that little Band-Aid vibe in there, imagine that fragrance with a twist of M7. So take your Gucci Guilty Absolute Pour Homme with the leather and the patchouli and the vetiver, take that and drop in some M7 and then mix it up. And that's Elevated Oud by Zara. So it's fantastic for the price. Very strong, very long lasting, quality smell. And it's a mall fragrance. It's a mall fragrance, guys. So that's my video on mall boutique scents. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Do you think it's worth still supporting these brands, or shall we let there just be nothing besides high end? Shall we let all the medium tier and low tier stuff just, like I said, drift off into history and then get stuck with $300 bottles of BS with crystals on it and brass plates? You tell me. See you next time. This is the Unlist.